It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Pull up a chair. This is Wonder and Wander. Before we get into tonight, let's just check in. I do want to be honest with you. This episode's going to ask something of you. But not in a heavy-handed sort of way. We're going to be walking into some territory that a lot of men, myself included, have spent years walking around. So I want to start just by being here with you for a second before we go there. How are you doing tonight? Really, how are you doing? Okay, yeah. Let me ask you this, something to set the stage here. Is there a conversation about race, about power, about the world that you've been avoiding? Not because you don't care, but maybe because it feels too big, or too risky, or maybe it's because you're not so sure you'd say it right. Hold on to that thought, because that's where we're going tonight. I want to start with something that I've carried for a long time. Back in the 7th grade, there was a kid in my class who got picked on. Bullied regularly. In ways that I knew were wrong. I saw it. I knew what it was. And I did nothing. I didn't join in. I do want to be clear about that. But I also didn't speak up. I didn't step in. I didn't say a single thing. I just looked away and let it happen. Let it keep happening. I've thought about that kid more times than I can count over the years. And I don't know where he ended up. But I know that my silence cost him something. And I know what it cost me. It cost me a piece of my integrity that I spent a long time trying to reclaim. And that's the thing about silence in the face of something that's wrong. It doesn't feel like a choice in the moment. It feels like nothing. Like you're not doing anything at all. Doing nothing wrong. But silence is always a choice. And over time it becomes a kind of answer. There are conversations that most men were never taught how to have. About race, about power, about privilege. About the ways the world is built differently for different people. A lot of us stay silent not because we don't care, but because we're afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of realizing something uncomfortable about ourselves or the world we grew up in. And that fear is real. I'm not dismissing that at all. These conversations are genuinely hard. They touch things that are personal and historical and loaded in ways that can feel impossible to navigate cleanly. But here's what I've come to believe. The discomfort of having the conversation is almost never as costly as the damage of avoiding it. The silence doesn't protect us. It just lets the problem keep going. And keeps us from becoming the kind of men we actually want to be. Silence over time becomes a kind of agreement. We see it everywhere right now. The cost of looking away, it's no longer invisible. So let me ask you something. And I'd like you to go to that honest place. What's a topic that you've avoided because it just felt too uncomfortable? That discomfort that you're mentioning there, it's important. It almost always points towards something worth growing into. In my 7th grade history class, we learned about the pioneers who settled the Great Plains. For me, that story wasn't abstract. It was actually quite personal. My ancestors were among those early settlers of Nebraska. So this was my family's history. The way it was taught, the land was unclaimed. It was just empty, waiting for someone to come in and build something on it, to make something from it. That's the story I received. And for a long time I didn't question it, because it was my story. It was my heritage, and it connected me to something. But I got older, and it was then that I started learning the fuller version. That land wasn't empty. People had lived on it, had built lives on it, been connected to that land for generations before my ancestors arrived. The process of settling involved displacement, broken treaties, and violence that the history books that I was given entirely left out. And I had to sit with something really uncomfortable. The story I was handed to feel proud of was built in part on a story that was never really told to me. That didn't make me a bad person, but it made me responsible for what I did with the fuller truth once I had it. Every single one of us has grown up inside a story. A story about who matters, who has power, who belongs, and who gets protected. And we didn't write these stories. We inherited them from our families, our schools, our communities, and our country. And for a lot of us, the stories are incomplete at best, and distorted at worst. They left people out. They smoothed over things that deserve to be named. They handed us a version of history that was shaped more by who was doing the telling than by what actually happened. Questioning that story isn't disloyalty to the people who raised you. It's not ingratitude for what you were given. It's what it looks like to take truth seriously, to love your history enough to want the whole of it. One day, usually gradually, and not really all at once, we become responsible for whether we keep telling these inherited stories, or whether we're willing to look at them more honestly and decide what to carry forward. So let me ask you this. What's one belief about the world that you were taught that you've started to question? I want something specific to come to mind. Don't stay in that abstract space. Yeah. That question, that's not betrayal. What you're voicing right there, that's what maturity actually looks like. When I look back at that history, what the fuller story of westward expansion actually contained, my first instinct was defensiveness. It had felt like an attack on my family, on my heritage, on something that I'd actually been proud of. And I had to learn to separate these things. In one hand, I had to hold that what my ancestors had, it was real. People had worked hard and built something. And on the other hand, there was the context of how that happened, including the injustices that I wasn't taught. Both of those things are true, and holding both of them is harder than holding just one. But it's more honest. And I found that the men who can do that, who can stay in that discomfort without collapsing into either shame or defensiveness, are the ones who actually move things forward. There's something I keep coming back to when I think about hard conversations. An image of a bison coming from the plains. A bison, it responds much differently than other animals on the plains. You know how a bison moves when a storm rolls across the plains? Surprisingly, they're the only large animal out there that turns and runs towards the storm, not away from it. Every other animal on the plains flees. And because they're running in the same direction as the storm, it follows them. The storm does. Sometimes for hours. But the bison figures something out by instinct that most of us have had to learn the hard way, or maybe we haven't learned at all. The fastest way through the storm is through it. Hard conversations are the same way. When we run, when we're silent, we stay in the storm longer. And when we turn and walk toward it, it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and it takes something. But we come out the other side, usually a lot faster than we expected. The bison doesn't enjoy the storm. It just doesn't waste time pretending it can outrun it. I really do think that's a lesson for each of us. It takes courage to sit in the pain of having been given an incomplete narrative by those that we trusted. It takes courage to stay in conversations that can be challenging. It takes humility to listen when someone's experience is genuinely different from yours, and to resist the urge to explain, defend, or redirect. It takes discipline to sit with discomfort instead of turning it into a debate. It takes real strength to say, I might be wrong about this. That last one is actually the hardest for most men that I know, myself included. We're taught, implicitly, perhaps even constantly, that admitting you're wrong is weakness, that changing your mind means you didn't know enough to begin with. But I've come to think that the opposite is true. The men I most respect are the ones who can say, I didn't understand that fully, and they mean it. And that's not a weakness, that's the capacity to grow. And without it, nothing changes, in the world or in us. This is how the world gets better. Not through perfection, not through shouting, not through shame, but through men who are willing to actually listen, to learn, to change, even when it costs something. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you really listened to someone whose life experience is different from yours? And when I say that, I mean not to respond, not to compare, but just to actually hear what they're saying. That kind of listening matters more than most of us realize. It changes things, including us. I want to be honest about something before we close. Everything I'm asking tonight is harder for some men than others. And I think that's worth calling out. It's not a small thing. If you grew up in a community where these conversations were actively discouraged, where questioning the narrative meant being ostracized, then even being willing to sit here and think about this stuff is something. I don't want to minimize what it costs to start moving in that direction. It's easier to stay comfortable, to stay quiet, to say, this isn't my problem, and then to genuinely believe it. Because the systems that protect some of us make it easy not to notice what they cost others. That's what privilege actually is. Not malice. Just the comfort of not having to see what you don't have to see. Choosing to ignore what it is that you don't want to see. And I say that as someone who's lived inside that comfort. As a white man, I've experienced a lot of privilege. I've benefited from things I didn't earn, and I sometimes fail to acknowledge that. I'm not standing outside this. I'm in it with you. What I've found is that the moment that you start to actually see it, to let the fuller picture in, you can't really unsee it. And once you do see it, you have a choice. Not a comfortable one, but a real one. Being human means being connected. What harms one of us harms all of us, even when we don't feel it directly. What heals one of us strengthens all of us, even when the healing isn't ours to receive. This isn't a political statement, it's just what's true about what we are as humans. We're built for each other. And the men who understand that, who live from that, tend to be the ones who leave something worth remembering behind them when they're gone. So let me ask you one question tonight. One more. Where do you feel called to be braver in this world? And I don't want this to be a vague answer. Let's get really specific with this. Yeah. That tug that you feel, that's not guilt. That's your conscience. And I think it's worth listening to. I want to close with something that's less of a challenge and more of an invitation. You don't have to fix everything. I hope we've already established that. You certainly don't have to do anything perfectly either. I just want you to be willing to stop looking away. To stay in the hard conversations a little longer than feels comfortable. To stand shoulder to shoulder with people who need something, who need someone standing beside them, including some that you may have walked past before. That's the work. And we're better at it together than we are alone. All right, well, our fire's burning low. Carry what you need and leave what you don't. You don't have to have it all figured out. None of us do. Myself included. Yeah, it's been good to be with you. Let's do it again soon, alright? I'll see you next time. Safe travels. That's all for today. Wonder and Wander is written and hosted by me, Mat Wuebben. Original music composed and performed by Calvin Armerding. If this episode meant something to you, think of one man who needs to hear it and send it to him. And if you haven't yet, leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts helps more men find their way to the fire. New episodes every Wednesday. Wander boldly, wander freely.